Okay, so this is a special installment um, with a special guest. Oh my God, look. He's doing a little ASMR feed for you. Okay, this is a first and it's like extraordinary. Oh my gosh. Okay. Everybody just needs to get settled in here. Oh my gosh. Okay, Luke, my cat. So, wow, he never comes up for these. This is like a special. He must like this idea. So, I'm doing a special installment on this one for Mira's question about like the reptilian notion of people being able to track your vulnerability and take advantage of it. And so this is actually a concept that I have led instructions on and taught in my professional corporate, or it's not even corporate, but like professional life as an executive. And part of so I'm going to talk about the tack that I normally take, and then we're going to flip it and talk about how this relates to Parinama method. So specifically, let's see. So in when you're working in business development and sales, a lot of times, there's this thing about trying to really understand the motivations and understand what matters to other people. And the thing that's challenging about that is most of the time people who are tasked with doing this have their own limited self-perception about the things that matter to them. So it's hard because there's like a projection of like the thing that matters. Like, so a lot of times like people be selling a large deal and, especially, yeah, I'm just going to say, like, if they're working on a deal and they're thinking that the only thing that, that it's very about money. It's like, if I discount what the price is, da, 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 without understanding that, people do things for a variety, like kind of a wide spectrum of different motivations. And we'll track these all to the hubs. But these motivations can be like people, like trying to make a decision so they can conserve their financial resources. So, I mean, one of the things might be that, someone wants to, buy an air conditioner and maybe you sell the cheapest air conditioner, but another air conditioner that someone could sell actually reduces their cooling costs by like an exponential amount more. So it's like a full larger picture. It's not just the transactional thing. Other things like conserving time, like doing things where, like being able to, make decisions, buy things that will help people like actually like, so sometimes people like say like a housekeeper will make, like people are familiar with the thing of like hiring a housekeeper because their hourly rate is, maybe like less than what yours is. So as a result of that, that's like a conservation of time. People buy softwares that consolidate tasks so that they have more time to do other things. And even in a way, like right now with all the softwares that are available for like individual business owners, like that's also like represents to a certain extent a conservation of time. Gaining status, so doing things, and this is kind of the antithesis of saving money, or and we're using saving money as like a projection of somebody's idea of what somebody cares about, is like gaining status is like to, obviously there's like there's just kind of deep aspects of like gaining status that have to do with like actually gaining safety, because status holds with it a certain amount of like social safety and even like physical safety, to the extent that it gives access to like greater like levels of access and resources. And then there's accumulating resources, that can be a motivation, like the innate desire to be generous, and also like a desire for meaning, to find meaning in the thing that one is doing. So I bring this up, because this is maybe like a little bit boring, But I'm just framing it in the easiest way that I have accessible in my brain, which is that it's like, so I'm just framing it initially with this thing where it's like you've got people who are trying to like motivate people to buy things, only understanding like a very narrow scope of why somebody would actually like buy something that's just a projection of themselves. Now, when you get into like in a professional level, when you get into higher levels of like of like working with people that have more sophistication or even like more manipulative, and I mean manipulative in terms of being able to like bend a situation so it favors their interests. Really specifically, I'm going to take out as much as I can the notion of this being sinister, as much as it is like a person's having a desire to do something and that being strong enough that they're like making an attempt to like make the kind of the situation bend in their favor. Um, that there are people that are extraordinarily good at clocking other people's motivations. Now, extraordinarily good at it. And this can be just that they have some type of subconscious, like reptilian way of like, and I think a lot of this is subconscious. It's like recognizing patterns that you've seen before and knowing um, how to work them in your favor and not necessarily having full consciousness about why that happens, but it's being able to clock something that somebody else is unconscious about. The important thing is it's like two unconsciousnesses like sort of playing out. So where that comes from, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about where that like ability or that, like kind of that, comes from. Like it because quite frankly, the whole it's out there thing is not where we're going with this. Like the idea of like, how do they do that? Why do they do that? This they do that, but they do that. It's not really helpful, and it really creates like a very uncontrollable dynamic. It really, like, facilitates a dynamic of, like, it's happening out there, because one of the things that they're doing is they're picking up on something that we don't have total self-governance of, and they're pushing the button on it. So how do they do that? So there's certain things. So one thing I will say is that there are certain things that you can kind of clock in terms of body language and almost like flinching. So it's kind of like how people carry themselves, how people move their bodies, even like eye contact, like levels of confidence. But there's also a notion that you'll see, and people talk about this with like seduction, and even like when people are talking about like narcissists, like the tactics, it's like notice how a narcissist is like absolutely dramatically compelled in their interest in you initially when they meet you, is that like what they're doing is they're collecting and absorbing information, and it's like, and so it's sort of like, okay, well, and that feeling of being like attended to and seen and looked at is like oddly enough, it's like it scratches an itch and a desire to be seen and known, to have somebody be that interested in it, like in you, and in you and me or whatever, like the idea that's like, wow, you're really like these questions, you're really trying to like figure out these things about me that most people are really willing to disclose, because sometimes they can be really thought-provoking questions where it's like, wow, I never thought about that. And then it's like, well, I guess I've always blah, 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 blah. So that curiosity, and even like questions and watching and like tracking a response to it. Like, so seeing if somebody's defensive, seeing if somebody is easily emotionally provoked, seeing if somebody is like demonstrates notions of being reluctant, fearful, or like nervous about taking risks. Like noticing whether it seems important that the person likes you. And that's, and the idea of like, how do you figure that out? Well, like, it's actually not that hard. if you bring attention to it to see whether some, but we're not trying to figure other people out here. Like that's not the thing. We're actually trying to know ourselves so that these aspects of ourselves, that it's actually, we know what our drivers are, so they can't be used against us. Because when they're unconscious, when we are not aware of these facets, and I'm going to talk about them as they relate to hubs, they're used against us when we are not fully conscious of the fact that we are fearful of like conservation of financial resources and our security. There are people that can clock that that's something, and they'll use things like, and I'm not talking about like, actually, one of the things is it's really hard to tell from like, so like in many ways, like who it is that's great at this, as far as being able to be like, it's people in these roles, it's people in that, it's people in this. It's like there's just no, I mean, there really is no way to tell who's good at it other than to be good at it yourself, and to see like, oh, okay, I see, like to see what somebody is doing, and to see when they are actually like activating you. And when you know what your innate activations, motivations, triggers are, when you have full, or at least like really like like a reasonable level of self-awareness around them, nobody can hijack them like in plain sight without your knowledge of it. And this is the tough thing, because it's kind of like, look what they're doing to me. And it's like, this is kind of the become unfuckwithable kind of thing, where it's like, I'm not going to say that once you know what they are, people can't activate them. But if you're consciously watching them do it, you can actually have control over sort of how you reflexively react to it. So this is not a promise that's like, it's like things all of a sudden become like, immediately like just sort of like clear and you're operating like a robot. Still have the response, but you go, oh, I see that that's what's happening. And I'm going to adjust my response to it. And I'm going to be aware that's going to be uncomfortable. I know what's happening, and I'm actually going to be putting myself in a position where I'm not letting this get to me. I had one. So I'm just going to use an example out of context, and I'm going to walk through the stack here. Is that my own self-awareness around how much I want to belong, like in like a fourth hub, was really like absent. I didn't understand that this was part, and this was something like people used to say to me. They're like, "I don't know how you," but like they would like make observations about me that were like, it was clear that I wouldn't bless me, like want to be isolated or like whatever. Like it was interesting that people would notice it. So it's visible to everyone except me. Like my profession was building teams of people. I really cared about those people. And, um, and that kind of like thing about like wanting to be liked and belonged, um, the like went down, but belonging became important, and to connect, like the kind of hunger to connect. And it's not with everybody, it's not with, but like this thing where it's like, I want to belong. And I was working in it was like a business related thing, and they were really affluent people that all of a sudden were incredibly nice to me, and they were being like kind of familiar and familial with me, and I literally started acting outside of my best interest with it. And it was like, I was like and it was like I was just so like drawn in by them joking with me. All of a sudden they're like, sort of like, it's like, they're joking and they're making, like creating this sense of, this familiarity and like simpatico with me. And I was like, and so I started making concessions. And then I was like, and this was a place where I was like, like for, in my practice. And this was the time of, my life where this awareness surfaced, where all of a sudden I saw that happening. I went, whoa, okay, I see myself wanting to like be connected. I see my innate desire to connect with people, and that connection, like feeling so good and being like, "Oh, we're laughing about something together." Um, and that I was like, "Oh," and I was immediately able to alter my behavior and responsiveness. And so that protected me against like making because and then they'd ask like, "Hey, will you do this?" And I'd be like, "Sure." In an old version, it'd be like, "Oh," or it'd be like all of a sudden like, "Oh God, I don't know how to say no to that because now I'm going to break this thing I want because I'm going to be breaking the simpatico by saying no to someone who is like where I'm attached to this connection." And there's, in that sense of like, no, I don't want that to happen. So it's just an example, and I'm not using specifics, but it was something where I could have made a move that, um, like, wound up taking a lot of my time to undo and potentially, yeah, and also it wasn't like a super high stakes thing, but it was something where it was like, I was kind of putting myself at risk. I was taking on risk for them that I had no party in, like, so that there's that happens. So, okay, here we go. So let's talk a little bit about how this relates to the hubs and how the exploration. So the thing that I'm just going to re-emphasize here is that when we come to understand these facets and aspects of ourselves, what happens is that when people start pushing the buttons on them, we see that they're activating something that we see what they're activating because now we're aware of it. And the thing is we give tells all the time. It's like it might be like, how do they figure it out? It's like, okay, yes, there's that whole thing, but there's tells all the time, which are like physical manifestations of like we how we are like our physical composure, but there's also the responses we have to things, like even things being like nervous about spending money or being very emotionally activated, like when somebody can push our buttons and we get very upset or and we're expending energy. So people can clock the fact that like, oh, this is like big, sort of like young sibling thing where it's like a sibling will figure out they can like really like wind up their sibling and just kind of like make them just incapacitate them by getting them so upset that they can't even be reasonable anymore, like that whole deal. Um so yeah, so let's talk a little bit. I'm just going to go hub to hub, and then um yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm just going to call it a day on this one. So I'm going to talk about first hub. So if someone um exhibits like reticence or even cheapness, like where they're very conscious of like um it's like who paid for what, or it's like that's so expensive, or like very like shows those types of signs, is like, so they're immediately showing kind of something that has very deep roots. It's not it seems like a minor thing, but they're showing that there's like a deeper seated notion about like conservation of resources and finances and and lack of the feelings of like physical safety and trust. So that one, I'm not going to talk too much about physical tells on this. That's first hub. One example. There's others. I'm just going to be going step by step. So one of the things is to become like incredibly self-aware of that, so that if you know that you have a thing that's a trigger for you, that it's like, oh, if somebody like owes me money, or if somebody shorts me, or I feel like it's going to destabilize me because I'm going to feel really like unsafe, slighted, nervous, like kind of like, um, bringing self-awareness to that happening and being able to just be like, oh, that's my thing. That's my thing, and, like, using, like, soothing, like, to be able to soothe oneself, and do the work, but the most important thing in the context of what we're talking about is to be able to see it with the level of awareness that you can see that it's happening and not reflexively respond to it with fear or reactivity. So, it's like the whole thing that we're doing in this is, like, knowing ourselves so that when that button is pushed, we're in control of how we respond to it. Now, the next is emotional reactivity. And this spans wide, but it's like when someone knows, like, and I just watched this happen in another sort of like I'll call it like a professional example, is that there was one party who and I was watching this from like, I guess sort of the sidelines. There's one party that was like a very powerful executive, and the other person was an attorney who was like kind of really poorly self-regulated. And that this kind of this powerful person just would like poke the bear a little bit. And they were like very like they were not super overt, like little jabs because they clocked them and they would just destabilize them. Like the person would just descend into chaos and like they'd be so upset and this and this and this and this. And they would just spend themselves and also reveal themselves and make themselves look crazy. So they're the person that appeared to be like absolutely like unprofessional and unhinged and like activated versus being able to see that the person's doing that and that they're clocking the fact that this person will become unraveled. So one of the things is like emotional reactivity. So it's not that we're not going to be emotionally reactive to something, we're going to see that somebody is doing it. And this whole thing of like they're being asked, like it's like this just is not it really is like if we just keep putting it out like where this is an outside thing where it's like they're doing this thing to me, they da 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 da. It's like the thing is like we're actually looking at like it's not like how it's like we're looking at how we catch the ball and reserve it. And if we don't know what that ball is and we see it coming, we just fucking slam it out of our faces. It's out of control. It goes flying everywhere. But if we're kind of like, oh, that's my thing. Yeah, I get upset when that happens. That's just like, it's super predictable that activates me. You catch the ball and you hold it, and then you decide how you're going to reserve it. It's important. Like, it's just, this is the important thing is that it's like, it's taking full governance of our internal state, which is I especially in the second hub, people have a really hard time with this because it's kind of like, look what you made me do. You made me react this way kind of stuff. There's a lot of that, like where it's like, well, it's not fair. They shouldn't be able to do this to me because that makes me feel this way. It's like, so that creates that's like a bridge to cross that's very difficult for people like because it's not that the other party isn't accountable, it's that before they're held accountable, like you're in control of your environment, like that. It's not like it's like the law and order state where you're like, I need the law to intervene with justice every time this is done. It's kind of like you're creating your own world, and then there's the matter of accountability that is like a secondary measure. It's a decision about how to react. So it's kind of like, how do I respond to this person? How do I create distance with this person? How do I make decisions about like it's not, it's not like slamming the ball back, looking like you're the crazy one, you're the unhinged one, and then your response is like shrapnel, and now they can kind of play the victim. It's like instead of the messiness, it's like you're taking command. This is like served, and it's like, maybe you hold the ball that's served to you and look around, you take a pause and you go, interesting. Maybe put it down. They served something to you, put it down. Interesting. Maybe say, yeah, you get that. You've given me something to think about. Let me get back to you. And then, like, when the time's right, you go, "Okay, here." Or you go, "Yeah, you know what? I'm not for me," kinda thing. So, like, this is the second hub. Third hub is like a super center for these things because it has to do with, like, first of all, like, there's the conservation of time, because time is, like, about our power. Time is like this, like, sort of ultimate resource, because when it comes to our power and an expression of it, that time is like sort of like where and how we can do it. And also to a certain extent represents like protections against like the use of our time and the draining of our energy, like gaining of status, accumulating resources. But when it comes to third hub, and this can is also related to emotional reactivity, is to if someone can sense that we are like the need for status is a strong driver. There's a thing where it's like there's a need for status. There's a need to be seen this way. Um, then that can be almost like a seduction, where there can be like a, kind of sort of putting you in that position of being like, wow, I really, like of like respect and admiration, and holds you there, and then holds you there as far as like the condition of you remaining in that has to do with being in their good graces. So if yourself, if before we've really created an internalized internal sense of who and what we are, of our integrity, of our power, when it's relative to other people and someone uses that as like a, as a like gives you elevation, or uses it in the opposite. But either way, um like kind of goes, wow, wow. But you realize that, and like if you don't agree with them, they'll drop that position. One of the things is if you're a freestanding structure, none of that matters. Like, and also when people try to do it, it's like clowny. Like when people try to go, wow, you're so impressive, you're kind of like there's the inner knowing is like, well, yeah, yes, I'm impressive, but that you're kind of like, and you're like, but you don't actually know how impressive. Like, I know how impressive I am. If you're telling me I'm impressive with a very limited amount of information, I'm like, okay, do your thing. And like they can do it, but you're just kind of watching it. And it's kind of like, yeah, do your thing with this. And there's just no leverage gained. So that's one. These are just singular examples. There's more, and I'm more than happy to talk about them if anybody wants to have these conversations. I discussed the thing about belonging and connection. And for me, like I'll tell you that for me, that was very surprising. All of these are surprising. Like they're not really the things that people can like upset us about and activate us with. They tend to be surprising, because when they're not surprising, we can't really get activated. Once we have like full like purchase and ownership of them, it's like the activation, like getting like triggered and upset, it's kind of like it's like resolved to the extent where it's like, yeah, I see that that's like one of my things that you're grabbing onto, and that there's just no hold bars. Like there's just it's like there's no, like when we're unconscious about it, there's almost like two like handlebars on it that they can grab and start steering around. And we're like taking the handlebars off, and it's now, like it's it's internally operated, smooth surface on the outside kind of thing. And it's like the need to belong into a group. And this one has a lot of stickiness, even as it relates to, one example that just came up is like a job, like working in an environment where it's like just the need to like be, to be in a community, in a religious community, in a like whatever community, that sense that it's like, and this is like, I think one of the things about a cult, like when they say like these are the things that define a cult, is one of them is that if you leave, you no longer belong. It's part of a cult. If you leave, like you're literally like, like the condition of like belonging is like complete acceptance of like whatever the doctrine or regime is. Um, so those are the ones I'm gonna talk like those are the ones that I want to talk to. And even like the like some of the stuff about, yeah, so I'm gonna leave that at, like, there, like, so that's the connection and belonging, and some of the things now when we go into the upper hubs are how we want to be perceived. So when people tell us like, "Oh, you seem like you're like 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 wow, you're like telling us things." Like it's flattery is kind of like how this is used. And like there's like one level of flattery where people just project on you what they value. So they'll point out things like, like their values and go, "Oh, you're this, you're that." But then there's another level of flattery, which we're talking about, like kind of in this sort of reptilian sense, where people will actually track, they can tell like who you want to be. And then they'll tell that to you. And then and like, if you do not have this sense of self and sense of knowledge of like who and what you are, that people can kind of give it to you, and that becomes something that also is like a kind of a control. So I think that's it. I mean, for this, um, mm, 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 just thinking, yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it for this, Mira. This is it for the special installment, special request, and let's see. Yeah, I mean, I guess as a final word, yesterday I had a meeting and the person I was talking to kept emphasizing that this is a spiritual practice. And I was like, I don't, it's interesting because I kind of don't recognize this that way, because I asked, I said, can you just kind of give me more an idea of what spiritual means here? And it's like, well, like what did that person just do? Somebody just threw a package over the wall. But my response was really along the lines of like how practical this is. So I think the notion was like spiritual is sort of like sort of like expansive, and I said, well, it's just energy and matter. So it's like wherever we're it's kind of both. Uh, I don't and like the idea of almost like, yeah, it's I don't know. I don't like, I guess the reason that I don't see this as like a quote unquote spiritual practice, because there is an aspect of it that is transcendent of a current state. And in that, I guess that's spiritual. I guess I don't even know what spiritual means anymore, because it's like it's just so ubiquitous as far as people being like what that how even that word is used. So if somebody can tell me what the word spiritual means, I'm super interested. Um, but but going back to like my final word on this is that, so with parinama there's like definitely a component that is like exploratory, almost like philosophical exploration of where we're going inward and we're consciously reclaiming ourselves. And I feel like that's actually, it's to me it's like more practical. Like there's an aspect of it that is like practical, like which is like what we're talking about here, for really how this is entering into our lives and positively impacting our experience of being alive, and giving us more access to our power and our joy and our sense of trust and the capacity to really express ourselves without it being like, interfered with these kind of, like, false, adaptations. So there's people doing work outside of my window, so I'm gonna wrap it up. But anyway, I'm gonna say thank you, and I'm looking forward to the next time. Mira, thank you for the question. Any comments get a response. I just wanna emphasize that, and I will see you next time. All right, bye for now.